a lot of the work that I do, it is very challenging and very interesting problems. And often, you'll come up with an understanding or an insight that you didn't start with. Especially about why a person is behaving a certain way, especially because from the outside it seems all wrong, and you are trying to sort of understand that why would they do this. I mean, it's obvious that this is this product or this behavior is good for them. Why would they do it? And then going a little bit, it's almost like a fact finding, like a detective is sort of going into their lives and trying to really understand what is actually motivating or triggering a specific behavior, even though to you it sounds very counterintuitive. So that's what brings me joy in professional life. And then of course, the impact that if you're actually able to design something which can talk to that person's life and bring about that positive change.
I will start off with our first question. So, you first studied mathematics at St. Stephen's and then proceeded to do an MBA at IIM Bangalore. Could you describe this journey a little bit for us?
So, ever since, I mean, I can remember I was always interested in, why people behave the way they do. But when I was young, I did not know at that point how I could convert that into a career. So I wanted to study psychology at school, but in the 90s, if you could do the sciences, then you ended up doing the sciences. And from there, I went down a well-trodden path. I did, mathematics, then I did my MBA. And even when I was doing my MBA, the class that actually I found most exciting or inspiring was consumer behavior. So that was a class which, I remember being enamored by the whole subject. I went into consulting. I was in consulting. I was in McKinsey for 10 years. But even when I was in McKinsey, I was always attracted to projects which had this element of behavior, insights in it. So, I worked, for example, with a large direct sales company on what do Indian women want when it comes to door-to-door selling, or I worked with a big media conglomerate on how do you increase readership, how do you increase viewership. So even the projects that I was doing at McKinsey, the ones that I enjoyed the most had that bit of behavior in it. I think after 10 years in consulting, there came a time I took a sabbatical. I said, I am quite clear now about what is the exact thing that I'm passionate about, what I'm interested in. So it's time to take that jump and make it into, a full career, take it from there. And from there, I mean, it was, I was trying to see what should I do. And of course, the more obvious thing would be to just get into a research organization. But research or market research as it existed then, especially, it was not, it was the methodologies that they were using that was quite dated. Nothing new was happening in that field. And so by chance, I mean, I was just going through all the organizations which exist in this space, and I came across this organization called Brain Juicer, and I thought, oh, what is it that they do? And they basically were using behavior science, which 10 years back was a very emerging field, in working mainly with private sector companies on how they can make their marketing communication research more impactful. So I had set up their India office, and that was actually my entry into this field of applied behavior science. With Brain Juicer, we did almost 150 projects in India. Very exciting work, but all private sector focused work. I mean, one of the work that we did, for example, was working again with one of the big media companies on which soaps, they made daily soap operas. So which soaps would actually resonate, what storylines would resonate more with audience or not, and use very innovative techniques, to actually do that. So I did that, and then in between, I also, took some breaks. I have three boys, so that happened, and then took another sabbatical, and then this opportunity came, with CSBC, which was, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was very interested in setting up, along with Ashoka, first of its kind center, which is the Center for Social and Behaviour Change. This was in 2017, and the mandate of the center, the mission of the center was how can we use behavior science to improve programs and policies of the government on the ground. So it was a very impact-oriented organization. How do we take what exists in the academic world already? The literature exists, but then how do we take this into real life and have impact on the ground? Nothing like that had actually been done in India before, and so I was very excited by the opportunity of helping set up this center. And so that's where this entry into the development sector and application of behavior science, that's where it sort of started in 2017.
What does it really mean to design behavior change interventions and frameworks. And you've spoken about scale a little bit. So how do you decide at what scale these interventions really need to be made?
Just to let me take you a little bit through the process of how, when we say applying behavior science, what does that even mean? So it initially starts with the first step, which is that you need to define the problem that you're trying to solve. And I think one has to be cognizant of the fact that not every problem is a behavioral issue. I mean, some problems are infrastructural issues, some are, supply side issues. So everything is not behavioral. So first, of course, whenever we get into this work, we try and define the specific behavior that we want to change and be comfort, or at least have that comfort that this issue is indeed behavioral. If you want to solve the bigger problem, behavior is, the key piece that needs to be solved. Once we've done that, actually, then we come to the heart of the process, which is first is diagnose, where you are actually going into the field with your target segment, mostly doing qualitative work, really trying to understand what are the current barriers which prevent the behavior from happening. And I told you before, I mean, we look at barriers which comes to motivation, that, okay, maybe they don't want to do the behavior. It could be that it's on the ability side, that the behavior is too difficult. Or it could be that, they're not getting that last mile, last push, to actually do that behavior, whether it's a reminder or some sort of a trigger or whatever, that's not happening. So we do this diagnosis in the ground. It's very important, for example, this diagnosis phase is very important because you have to understand the context of your target segment. I mean, a very interesting example comes to mind when we were doing some work in privacy and financial inclusion and so on and so forth. We went with the mindset of understanding, okay, for rural women, what does privacy mean? And usually we understand privacy in a certain way. People like you and me, we think of privacy in a certain way. But when it came to financial products, for example, a lot of women said actually the privacy that they needed and why they like to store money in cash and not on a digital product was that they needed privacy from their family members or their husbands. They did not want them to know how much money they had saved. So this diagnosis phase is very important because you need to understand the context of what your target segment is doing. If they're not using, for example, a digital savings product, you realize, okay, one of the big concerns they have is privacy from their own family members. And so when you go into the next phase, these are the kind of things that you need to keep in mind. And when you're doing this diagnosis, you look at the barriers, but you also may look at facilitators. You may look at positive deviance. You may look at, that one woman who is indeed saving every month, and you want to go and understand, what is enabling her to do it. What are the facilitators in her life? So that's the diagnosis phase, right? And you have a lot of, barriers and facilitators, and then you go into the design phase where you say, okay, now I have these barriers. I have some ideas in forms of facilitators. Now let me come up with some design ideas or intervention ideas on what could help overcome the barriers I've seen in the field. And the idea there is, how can I make that behavior more attractive? And in that sense, more aligned with the person's goal, more aligned with, making it more fun. How do I make that behavior more easy, which I've already talked about. Sometimes you're looking at how do I make that behavior a little bit more social, because we are all social animals. If most people are doing a certain behavior, if that's the norm, you're more likely to follow. So can you add a social component, to the behavior? And then, of course, you think about the timeliness. When is the right time for interventions? If you want to, let's say, do a savings product, probably the right time of intervention maybe when they get the salary. So you need to think a little bit about timing. What's the right time to deliver an intervention? And so you come up with a whole list of intervention ideas, and then you narrow down based on many criteria, including what is feasible, what is doable, but also where you think the impact would be most. And then, of course, we go into the testing phase, where if it's a digital intervention, we could A/B test it. If it's actually an offline intervention, then you go on the field, you'll do a pilot, you learn from that pilot, and from that, then the idea is, let's take it to scale. So most of these projects, when we are doing, we are working with either the government directly, or we are working with an implementation partner, so that after we have evidence that, look, this intervention does work, that partner or the government entity involved can then take it to scale. Most of it actually happens at a state level, and that's what we are usually gunning for, that if we are doing a pilot in a few districts, we are hoping that the scale is at least at a state level, this would be implemented. So that's the objective that we have in mind.
What developments in your field do you find particularly exciting and promising? And also for people, and especially women who are looking to enter the field and are aspiring to make a difference in the field, what advice would you give based on your journey?
See, I think what I find interesting about this field, as I've, we've talked about, touched upon it a little bit, is that with technology, I think this field can have quicker and sort of more scalable impact. And I think that's what is exciting right now. With the smartphone penetration reaching where it's reaching, I think the potential of harnessing that, leveraging that, I think that's very exciting, for me. I think we've also just barely scratched the surface of bringing a few disciplines together. So, there's marketing, there's product design, there's UI, UX design, there's behavior science. More and more, we are working with partners which come from different disciplines. And I think there is a lot of, again, power to be unleashed by bringing all these pieces together. So when you're solving a behavioral problem, we are looking at it from all these sides, the marketing, the UI, UX, the product, the process, the policy, all of it together. So I think there's a lot more that can be done bringing, all these disciplines together. As far as, journey is concerned and, lessons or what I would say is, see, in this field, pragmatism, I think, is the most important, and I guess a lot of patience, because whenever you try something in the field, I mean, whenever you're trying something in real life, whenever you are wanting to bring impact, there are too many uncertainties and things actually keep changing. So the work is very dynamic. You may start from one place and you want this perfect intervention and you have this perfect idea that you are so excited about implementing. But there are many considerations in the way. And by the end, the intervention may be very different from where you started. But I think to be okay with that kind of you need to enjoy that sort of dynamic environment, be okay and not be a perfectionist, because a lot of times when you're doing things on the ground, when it concerns the government, when it concerns policy, you have to be more pragmatic. And I've often found that while everybody likes to innovate and come out with exciting new ideas, often it's optimization which will bring you more results than innovation, because the systems are already quite overburdened. So bringing in, putting in new ideas often is harder, but tweaking what already exists, is always, and may not be the sexier thing, but it's actually sometimes more impactful. So I think, and the last thing I would say is that in this field, actually two more things, is that you fail a lot. I mean, because it's an experiment, you're piloting, testing. There are many things that don't work, but I think you have to have that mindset of being open to learning, open to mistakes. And I actually, there's almost this joy in not knowing, will this work, will this not work, and so you need to be excited by and be okay with actually failing many times in the things that you try. And yes, if anyone actually wanted to get into this field, I would say that since this field actually brings a lot of many disciplines together, I think some experience or some exposure to, for example, how does the field of marketing works, the whole digital UI, UX design, having some sort of exposure to that, if you bring it all together, then that's when you can actually enjoy and have the most impact in this field. So yeah, I mean, and I think I say that for my personal journey, especially because you asked for women, I would say that the way that I look at it is that when you look at your career, it is a more a marathon. It is actually something that you need to think in much longer term time frame rather than short term. I think at any point in time, I took a lot of breaks in between. I wanted to be there when my children were young. Even now, I mean, that is a big priority. But the thing is that, even if you need to take breaks, I mean, if you can stay connected to the field in any shape or form, and continue to do, just stay connected, and you will realize that your career may take many different forms. I mean, for me, like in consulting, I was from a management consulting point, I was looking at insights. Later in Brain Juicer, I was looking at more from private sector things. Now, in the work that I do at CSBC and also some other organizations in the dev sector. So I think the shape changes. But I think if you realized early on, okay, what's the core that I want to stick to, and remain engaged with it in whatever shape or form, even when you're taking a break. And if that could just be learning more about it, for example. So I think, that's been my mindset through the last 20 years, that once I kind of understood what is exciting for me, where the nature of my engagement with that has been different. But I think staying true to the core of what I enjoy, which is human behavior. That has been like the only thing with which I decide whether to do X or Y.